Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new episode of the Spill Your Beans podcast. Today we are continuing our series of Marvel Cinematic Universe reviews. We're doing them in threes. Last time we talked about Iron Man 2 and The Incredible Hulk, and today we're going to be talking about Thor. Someone beeps really fucking loudly outside, so that's annoying. We're going to be talking about Thor, Captain America, the First Avenger, and Avengers Assemble, rounding off Phase 1. Today I'm joined by Ben Vacher, a film graduate and a worker in the camera department in the industry.
Hello.
I'm impressive. I'm getting big names up now. He's in the industry. He's not a film student anymore. He's doing good. Yeah, how you doing, man? You good?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on board.
Absolute pleasure.
It was actually really nice rewatching these ones because I think I sent you a message being like, yeah, Thor, Captain America, you know, they're good. They're not really my favourites of the MCU, but I've actually had a really good time rewatching them, so I'm excited to get into them today.
I remember earlier this year when I kind of like did a huge rewatch. I started watching these and I'm like, I'm sort of expecting them to be shit, so I ended up quite enjoying them in the end, weirdly enough, and I thought that was pretty good. So yeah, no, I really enjoyed watching them again. They've got a little bit of sort of charm to them, especially I found with the earlier ones like Iron Man. I really loved initially, because it's so disconnected to the Marvel Universe. I'm so used to these films having so much connection. And these films do follow the same kind of vibe. But we'll get onto that in a bit more detail in just a bit. First of all, though, Marvel, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What was your first Marvel film? Do you remember which one you watched first?
First Marvel film? Yeah, so I remember in the build-up to the Avengers, I was suddenly like, what's going on here? I need to jump on this MCU bandwagon. And funnily enough, I think it must have been Captain America and Iron Man 1 and 2 downloaded on the classic iPod Touch 4th gen and watched them whilst on holiday on that tiny 3.5 whatever inch screen. But I had a really good time with them. I really enjoyed them. And yeah, from there it's all been cinema experiences if I can.
Have you seen every one, when they come out?
Pretty much, since Avengers Assemble, almost every one. And I have a big love for Winter Soldier, because that's the sort of film that started off my almost film club friendship group when I was at school.
Right.
So very much that 2014 to 2018 era of Marvel. It was, pretty consistent cinema-going experiences.
Yeah, no, I was kind of on and off. I sort of tuned out for a bit and then came back. So I don't know, Phase 2 was a bit of a blur for me. I didn't really see many of those. And then I came back and watched Civil War. Didn't have a fucking clue what was going on, obviously. And then I stopped watching it after that. I watched the Spider-Man ones. And then Infinity War came out and I was like, you know what, I'll go and watch it. And I'll give it, it's probably going to be shit. I'll see if it's any good. If I like it, then I'll go back and watch some of the other films. Fucking loved it. Really good. And I'm like, oh, that's annoying. I have to actually watch films.
That's how they get you. They get you with the ensemble ones, and then you have to go back and watch all the solo films.
It's annoying. But yeah, no, I've ended up doing a big rewatch at the beginning of this year, and again, going back to Phase 1, very interesting stuff. Very, very interesting stuff. So before, we're going to talk about Thor first.
The first Thor.
The first Thor. We're going to be talking about that before we go on our first break, but so Thor. When did you first see this one? What were your first initial reactions years ago? Do you remember when you first saw this?
Okay, so I actually can't pinpoint when I first watched this one because I don't think I watched it in the lead up to the Avengers. I think I might have caught it at a friend's sleepover post Avengers time. When I first watched it, I don't think I really enjoyed it that much. But actually going back, I quite liked the little nuances it has because...
It's charming, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of the Marvel films now, obviously because there's such a big history and continuity to it, it feels like you've almost got to revise, a bit of the story when you go into it. But this being the first Thor and his origin film, it introduces you to all of these new concepts. So it actually felt quite refreshing and self-contained to an extent.
It was very brave of them, I think, to go from Iron Man and Hulk to
space gods.
Yeah, I would have thought Captain America would be the next step, especially with the connection to Howard Stark. I would have always thought that Captain America would have come first before that, and then Thor would have been. And almost it weirdly kind of makes sense that Thor would come right before Avengers, considering the villain's Loki in both. So it's a weird one, but you know, I like this for what it is. It was very brave, and I don't particularly love the film. I think it has a lot of things that I'm sure we'll nitpick about in quite a bit. You know, fucking Dutch angles for a start. But I think it's one of those ones that I do have a little bit of love for, but I'm also a little bit embarrassed. I want to kind of keep it a bit down. I don't want to tell people how much I love this film. Because it's good, I like it, but I'm like, I know deep down it's ass.
Well, I think I enjoyed it more this time than when I first watched it.
Yeah.
Almost going back on what I said about it being a nice self-contained thing, was seeing how these characters that have evolved so much since this film came out, how they started. Like, obviously we have Loki, who's just had, you know, their solo series come out, seeing how they sort of first appeared in the MCU and what sort of character traits are the same and different, how Tom Hiddleston plays that character. Yeah. And even people like Darcy, who was in WandaVision, and it's like, oh yeah, she started out in this film and she's still driving vans.
Yeah, like, it's a weird one. I think the characters in this film are interesting, but I think, well, we can go through them sort of a bit at a time. I think, obviously, notable performances, of course, from Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston, who are brilliant in this. Both newcomers at this point as well, quite like, not like totally unheard of, but like this is kind of very early in their like career. And it's amazing the fact that they're still both playing those roles to this day. And seeing how far they've come, it's absolutely fantastic. Specifically Chris Hemsworth, who also plays the titular character. What do you think about him in this film? Because he changes a lot, especially through like
his character has changed a lot, hasn't it?
Yeah. Do you prefer it then as a more sort of space god kind of person, or now it's a bit more refined and humanized?
Yeah, I definitely prefer the characterization of Thor now, particularly from Ragnarok onwards. But it is quite interesting. At the start of this film, he is leaning very heavily into that arrogant, I want to rule Asgard kind of guy, and kind of lacks the sort of qualities that we now know him for, I think, for Thor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It was interesting seeing he changes a lot over the course of this film. Obviously, the story sort of plays into him going to Earth and Natalie Portman's character sort of humanizing him and grounding him and stopping him from wanting to just go and fight. So I guess I enjoyed the sort of melodramaticness that he had in this film. And I think there's elements of that get carried on over to the later films. But yeah, it's kind of interesting how much that might have come from Kenneth Branagh's direction, being a more Shakespearean director, leaning more into that sort of, melodramatic theatre-ness of it almost.
That's kind of what, it's probably the best way to kind of describe this film really in the performances, and it's sort of like that sort of melodramatic kind of style. Because part of me looks at it and goes, oh, like, some of it is played for laughs, like when he smashes the like mug. Another, I love that. That's great. That's a lot of fun. But like, it's a lot of it's not played for comedy in a weird way. And I don't know. That's the one problem with this film is I feel like it has a lot of good ideas that maybe could have been done better with different people behind the wheel almost. I think the concept of like a man falling from the stars and having to, you know, blend in with Earth and all that sort of thing. I think it works really well. I think where this film almost falls apart a little bit, weirdly, is actually its connection to the wider MCU.
Okay.
For me, at least. Which is not a common criticism, but the idea, I think, with bringing in Sheard and Agent Coulson and Hawkeye, who does like nothing in this, he just
goes up a crane.
He aims and then doesn't do anything, and it's like, why? But like I don't know. It's an interesting one. For me, it's sort of when it connects it to the wider world, it feels less like the kind of traditional superhero film that I like to see. I love superhero films and the way they've sort of changed over time. But like Iron Man had this, even though with the connectivities and stuff, and even in Iron Man 2 where they had like the Cap's like shield and stuff, like little things like that. With them and elements of Thor, you kind of get the sort of early Spider-Man film impression where it's like it's sort of its own thing. It's quite warming. It's its own story. It doesn't have to connect or hint to something else. And part of me misses that.
Yeah.
Part of me doesn't, because I feel like the Marvel films in the new context with just interconnectivity are better. Me personally. However, looking back then, I'm like, I wish this film didn't have that Shield involvement and could have just been its own story about like a man falling from the stars, falling in love, having to better himself to defeat his demons. There's a really good story in there. It's just a shame it's hidden underneath a big pile of like what I could only describe as shit.
Yeah, well, I see what you're saying there, because I think it's quite interesting the way it sort of opens up almost in a sort of horror paranormal vibe when they're in the van chasing the storm, tracking it down. It's all very like close-up shots, handheld camera, lots of energy going on. And yeah, you have made me think, like, would it have been a better film if it was just Natalie Portman and those characters and Chris Hemsworth rather than the rest of Shield coming in, and if it was them discovering who this alien almost is.
But their involvement is interesting, but it's unnecessary almost. Even having any sort of outside force, I like the fact that it's so isolated in the middle of the desert, like this little town. That works so well. This gives me the vibe of a film that would have been like really good in like the late 80s, early 90s. A bit like sort of Labyrinthy, where it just accepts that it's really weird, but doesn't try to be like gritty and like realistic about it. It's just like a man from the stars has fallen from the sky, and now he has to learn his lesson, and then he fights a big metal creature at the end. It's like it feels a very traditional kind of story.
Lots of classical themes in it.
Yeah, when you sort of like go through it, it's a very simple story, and it's a very it's a story you've definitely seen before and probably done better and worse in a lot of different cases. I think that's the thing for Thor. It has a lot of great ideas in there that could have really worked, but I think only because of the time that it was made, I just don't think it works in conjunction with the other films that like around that time.
Yeah.
Like when did this come out? Like
2011.
2011. Like that's mad.
There's definitely a charm to it, but yeah, no, I think I do agree with you that there are lots of concepts within it which, if focused more on their own, could have been interesting films, and perhaps it's still at that early phase of Marvel where it's trying to juggle lots of different ideas, set up future films, and also get its own story out there.
Yeah.
Where perhaps it doesn't hit all the marks as it potentially could do.
I think that's where Marvel does kind of fall apart for me generally, and especially in future films. Is like the big, spectacular, come-together films are always the best because the other films are a little bit bogged down with that sort of thing. And this is a sort of separate thing. I know you haven't seen Shang-Chi, but this is the kind of problem I have with that, where it's like, it's so connected. It has to fit so well within the continuity of like 25 odd films beforehand that it's almost, it holds back from telling its own story, even though Shang-Chi almost sells itself on doing that. And I think it would have been nice to see. And the thing is, Thor is very much its own story, but it's got that sort of early MCU essence of like, you can see they're trying to weed it together. And like, at the time, I remember everyone was like kind of about that, kind of like, can't wait to see what they're going to do next. Like an Avengers film, that's insane that they're able to like pull that off. But yeah, no, I think in terms of characterization, though, looking at certain people, I think I'm not too keen on Natalie Portman as Jane Foster. I never really was. And you can kind of see why maybe she didn't come back for Ragnarok, but then again, she is going to be in Love and Thunder as a sort of is it female Thor, or is it just like, I can't remember what the official character name is, or something like that.
Well, it'll definitely be interesting how Taika Waititi's direction plays off her character, for sure.
But I feel like his style of directing anyway, and his aesthetic and his vibe, the life that he breathed into Ragnarok probably would have been perfect for the other films as well, in a weird way. It's like, this film especially, I mean, I'm not even going to get into the Dark World, because I can barely even remember
I do not remember anything about Dark World apart from Christopher Eccleston and Greenwich. That's it.
Yeah, I watched it earlier this year, and I couldn't remember it about a week after I'd seen it. 2 days, maybe even like an hour. It's a very forgettable film, and I think,
I love all these little sounds like in the background.
Right. Yeah, no, I think with Thor 1, it definitely has that vibe where you could have had a sort of retro 80s kind of vibe to it. It's a shame that probably wasn't as hip back then, in like 2011, it took a few more years. But I feel like if Thor was like if the first Thor was made now, it would immediately have that vibe, like the Rainbow Bridge and all that sort of thing. It would have lent so heavily into that sort of.
It is interesting how different some elements of Thor that are still in the films now look. For example, like you said, the Rainbow Bridge. I was watching and I was like, wait, so this is what it looks like before Ragnarok? Because if I remember Ragnarok, it's almost like a Rainbow Road sort of Mario Kart track. And in this, it's like this glass thing with energy running through it. Yeah, it's interesting how the designs have evolved.
Yeah, of Asgard generally, and like characters and how they look and how they come across. I've always hated Thor's friends. I think they're annoying. And I despise them. I just despise them.
They're not actually in this much, though, are they?
They're not in any of the films much. That's the problem. They just sort of rock up, and you're like, "Oh, these guys! I love these guys. I fucking hate these guys. They're so like, they just for me don't add anything to the story, bar like a pre-warning of Loki. But that could be done through like a signal or something, or like a letter. You don't need. I don't know. But like that's the sort of thing. There's a reason they were all killed off in Ragnarok again.
I didn't even remember that they were in Ragnarok, to be honest.
Honestly, it's really funny. One of them's sort of standing outside the portal when Hela comes through and she just throws a knife at him and he just drops to the dead.
They're just gone straight away.
Different actor as well. Different actor plays him because probably the original one didn't fancy coming back.
Just going to brush this under the rug.
It was good, but I'm sort of just like, this film is a weird one for one because it has so much to it where I'm like, this is like, there's a lot here. There's stuff to talk about here. There's a lot of interest, there's a lot of setup, there's a lot of ideas that work really well, but the execution just ain't it.
Well, for me, I think my favourite moments of it is the dynamic between Thor, Loki, and Odin. Also, can we talk about Anthony Hopkins being in this? Imagine Anthony Hopkins being cast now in a Marvel film. I feel like that would be like quite big news. Whereas back then, because it was Kenneth Branagh as well, it almost feels like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. You know, they can get Anthony Hopkins now. I don't know, maybe he would still do it, say yes to that sort of thing.
I don't think they can afford him now. That's probably why they killed him off in Ragnarok. Although I do love his performance in these films. He's not... Anthony Hopkins is a phenomenal actor, and he's definitely reining it in here. It's not his best performance by like a country mile. But what I do like about his portrayal of Odin in all of the films, that he is just old, angry, shouty man, and I quite like that.
Goes for a nap for half the film.
Yeah, that as well. Just sort of gets a bit tired and fucks off, and it's like, a lot of that sort of stuff is very like traditional kind of fairy tale almost. I'm not really too keen on that. I think like the whole thing of falling asleep and do you like the Loki Thor rivalry? Because that's obviously something that is set up in this film, and has continued throughout pretty much all of them. I think it's believable in this. I think it's really good. Again, carried by Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth performances. I think it's one of the things that's always worked about the Thor franchise. You know, even in the worst times in like the Dark World, that's still done well. Like the relationship between the pair is always like enjoyable, and it's great. It's good to watch because there is a bit of camaraderie there, but there's also, you can tell there's a bit where they do hate each other as well. And I think obviously it changes film by film, but as an introduction to the concept, it works really well. And I think it lands. It's sound.
I did find it quite interesting though. I'm just making all the noises in this. I did find it interesting though, like the start of the film obviously has that little flashback prelude where you see them as these young brothers, and they seem to be kind of friends. And even like towards the start of the film, still when Thor is about to be put on the throne, like knighted or whatever. You still feel like, obviously there's rivalry, but you still feel like they get on, they're friends. And then Loki suddenly like twists and then starts obviously causing mischief. I don't know, some aspects of it kind of felt very rushed. Obviously, like there's the whole moment where he finds out he's half frost giant or whatever. And that sort of builds into his character and his spite towards Odin. But yeah, some of it did feel quite brushed over, and I think I would have been more interested to lean more into that brotherly dynamic and where things sort of went wrong.
It's an interesting one because I feel like there's a lot of elements of this film which are, like, as you say, feel rushed. But I think I have to respect how much they did get right, considering. Because although Ragnarok is obviously like a better interpretation of the characters, it really takes it in the right direction. It still uses all the initial concepts set up there. It's basically, the comparison I make is it's like what like Ragnarok is to Thor 1 and 2, like Clone Wars is to the prequels. It sort of builds
Love
off
that.
what's already been there, but makes it better. And you have to admire the foundations in this, the designs of the characters. It is set up quite well. My only thing with this is there's a lot of fantastical ideas there. And if I wasn't already familiar with the character of Thor by the time I watched this, at least for the first time, I wouldn't have had a clue what was going on. There's so much in there. Like, even not even thinking about Loki being half like frost giant, like going off all the other stuff from there, and then actually thinking of that as well. There's loads of stuff in there, fantastical concepts, and I know that's what Thor's good for. But like going from Iron Man to like Hulk, and then going, okay, now space gods. One of them's a frost giant. There's 9 realms. They're all like doing their thing, and it's weird.
Yeah, it is quite a big jump. It's kind of, looking back, it is probably the most out there film in terms of the Avengers, where you have all these kind of contemporary present day characters, obviously Captain America perhaps not, and then suddenly this god from Asgard. Yeah, it is. Yeah, you have got to respect, almost in a sort of Guardians of the Galaxy way, how well and quickly they were able to integrate those characters within the sort of standard
And it works.
world, Earth-based stories.
Yeah. And it works as well. It works, as we'll talk about when we get to Avengers, the gelling of these characters and their universes do work well together. I think Thor was just a very brave one to do as your third character to introduce, like your third Avenger.
Definitely.
I would have thought it'd be much easier to do a Black Widow film or like a Hawkeye film than have them be the side characters. But then at the same time, you couldn't exactly have Thor as a side character. You couldn't have a Black Widow film where he just comes in with a hammer at 1 minute and then fucks off.
Just,
about 5
hello,
minutes
here's a
later.
little lightning strike.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
You couldn't really get away with that.
I think you might have touched about this in your part 1 podcast on MCU, but it is quite interesting watching these earlier films again and seeing, obviously there's a lot of elements that have been carried over, as you were saying, in terms of the Thor films, but also seeing almost how much more creative control and uniqueness they look compared to the rest of the MCU now. Obviously, we were talking about the Dutch tilts and these creative decisions that Kenneth Branagh and the cinematographer, I did write down the name Harris, I'm not going to try and pronounce the surname, my apologies, but they're close collaborators who have worked together on numerous films now. And I feel like a lot of the MCU films today, they get a director, they get a cinematographer who haven't worked together, and they give them the formula and they do their thing. Whereas this feels almost very much still a Kenneth Branagh film rather than an MCU film.
That's true. I'd agree with that. I think you're totally right with future MCU films, and it's in a good way and a bad way. Like, sorry, got choking mid-sentence there. Like, Thor is a film that I'm not too keen on in comparison to a lot of other more formulaic MCU films. Then I do look at it and go, well, actually, I do appreciate the originality of it, the uniqueness of it. And watch Thor, you feel like you're watching a totally different film, which I really like. Because then, I don't know, in a weird way, when you combine like these different styles, even that in itself can be more interesting. Like Avengers feels weird. Feels weird that they're all in the same universe. Like when you watch that, and I quite like that with future MCU films. It works because it's supposed to work. It's been designed that way, As much as like even we'll get to Spider-Man stuff in the future, but like I love Spider-Man. I love the Spider-Man films, even in the MCU. But I can't help but feel that they're all so heavily like ingrained into the MCU like culture, and
They all build off.
Yeah.
This might be sidetracking away from our focus films, but I read somewhere that like that's part of the deal with Spider-Man, is that they have to have, like, the Sony deal means that they have to have one main character from the MCU in it. Like we have Iron Man in the first one, in the second one we have Nick Fury. and now
No, Doctor Strange.
Doctor
That's
Strange.
interesting. I never really
yeah.
considered that, but that makes actually a lot of sense, like legally.
Yeah, legally. But yeah, it's always interesting how much of these stories are sort of influenced by the ownership and the deals behind the scenes.
Which is a lot of what it's like nowadays compared to, again, back to these older days when they're just
Yeah.
trying out new things. You have to respect it. That being said, like, Dutch angles in this are horrible.
They're so jarring, and I think they stood out to me more now because, like we were saying, I feel like Marvel films have quite a well-defined look now. I'm not saying... I feel like I always see arguments on Twitter about the cinematography is bland, there's no character. Like, I disagree with that. I still feel like they have character and they have a nice, like, visual style to them. But they definitely do have a certain amount of consistency in the way that scenes are shot to an extent. And coming back to this, it feels like that's just out the window with all these Dutch angles, which just feel unmotivated. Perhaps if they actually felt like they were there for a certain reason, I'd be like, oh, fair enough. But there's shots where there's like, they're driving this little van across the desert and then suddenly it's on a tilt.
Yeah.
And then they're in a wide and it's straight and then they're on a tilt close up again. And I'm like, what is this telling me? What?
Yeah, no. And I think you're totally right. It's very jarring to, especially this one, because, I mean, obviously lots of other aspects as well, but the Dutch angles, we keep talking about it, but it's so weird after watching so many other Marvel films, going back and watching this and being like, this is really weird. I
don't feel like they'd be able to get away with that sort of creative decision now. I feel like Kevin Feige would come in and be like, so these Dutch angles, why? Tell me why, and maybe we can have them. But if not, let's try and keep it, play it how we like it.
Oh yeah, no, they wouldn't even make it to the actual production. It wouldn't get past pre-production at that point with the fucking planning there. Especially nowadays, again, Kevin Feige, you're totally right. I don't know.
It is interesting how he's obviously the backbone of the MCU, and he actually produced these films, whereas I feel like now he has more of an executive producer role. He's almost like the showrunner, isn't he, of the MCU? But I don't know the answer to this, but I'd be interested to know how much input he had in Thor and Captain America with the producer titles compared to how much input he has now, where it seems to be even more behind the scenes.
It's
not sure what I'm saying with that. But.
No, but it is interesting because obviously things have changed, his position, but also the style of Marvel's filmmaking. And I think, interestingly, it might come back around again, I think, with newer films, because I'm starting to get a little bit of like fatigue with it. The most refreshing Marvel content I've had this year has been on TV. The episodic style of it, because it's new and it's refreshing and it's different. WandaVision's been experimental. Loki was very experimental. What If's their first animated project. I think with the films in the future, it's going to be very telling how long this formula lasts before people start to get a bit sick of it and like kind of just see what's coming with every story. But yeah, no. Is there anything else you want to sort of say about Thor before we move on to our sort of next little segment?
I'm going.
So you got your
having a little flick through my notes. I think I put Dutch tilts in big letters. I put ending ... sad. I think I was actually surprised by how much emotional connection I had with these characters. Like I said, the first time I watched this film, I don't remember enjoying it as much, and I'm curious whether that's more because of the connection I have with them from the present films and all of the content that I've had since this film has come out, that I have more of an emotional connection to them. But that moment at the end where, Loki lets go and there's that whole father-son, brothers moment. Yeah, I actually felt quite sad. I was like, oh,
that's
no,
fair enough.
Loki, don't go.
I'd agree, that did have quite a lot of it had a good emotional impact, I think, that sort of ending. What was the post-credit scene for this again? Because I can't quite remember. Is it setting up Avengers? Is it setting up Loki coming back?
Oh, I watched it.
Is it something to do with
I actually watched it.
I have a feeling it must be is it not like the Shield base or something with the Tesseract, and it's like him? Is it not something to do with the doctor character or the professor guy?
I don't know. I saw one. So I watched this and Captain America pretty much back to back. There's one where they talk about getting the Abomination on board, and then they get Stark in. It was like a one shot that played after the film. Maybe that was just my Disney Plus auto playing it. Oh, I can't think of it.
That's very interesting.
We'll be back after the break. I want to Google it, but yeah, maybe we can look at it later. And...
Yeah, no, I can't quite remember, but I was more just thinking if it was Loki coming back, then the impact of that ending. I can't remember if it's just that he's just back in Avengers, or whether that's hinted at the end of the post-credit scene in Thor. I presume it must be if they just sort of bring him back straight away. Before we go on a break, we're going to do our first segment. So we haven't actually got a jingle. I probably should think of a jingle there. So we're going to move on to our first segment, which is the record spinner.
Yes.
I ask guests to come on here and sort of nominate an idea of a film soundtrack or an individual track from a film that they particularly love or means something to them, that sort of thing, to sort of nominate and talk about and, you know, promote to people if they haven't either watched the film or listened to the soundtrack a bit more closely. We've had a lot of great picks so far, and I'm very curious to see what you're going to pick. Do you have any honourable mentions before we start?
So, before we start, honourable mentions. I was going to say Inception soundtrack, because that is probably my all-time favourite soundtrack. But I love film scores in general, and so I wanted to focus something to the MCU. And so my favourite MCU album is the Captain America Civil War soundtrack by Henry Jackman.
Really?
I really love this score, and I love the score he did for Winter Soldier as well, but I had to pick this one because when I was studying for my exams, when I was at school, GCSEs, A-levels, whatever, I'd have this album on a loop when I was studying, and it's just a great one to study to.
I do love my film music, especially with the MCU, and I never really. This is a sign for me to really have a listen to that soundtrack because I've only the main theme for Civil War, but other than that, I haven't really ventured into it.
No, it's definitely a good one. I love the opening, I think it's Siberian Overture, and the sort of emotional connections that the themes of that score has with the film. I think it's a really good one and one that I can always go back to. Definitely runners up, like I said, the Winter Soldier soundtrack, which again Henry Jackman did. But yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it when we go into Captain America. But it's also interesting how Henry Jackman takes the themes that Alan Silvestri introduces and develops them and evolves them. Yeah,
definitely. Great pick. If you had to pick a specific track from this entire soundtrack that would be your favourite, or the one you listen to the most, which one do you reckon you go for?
From the Civil War one?
Yeah.
I think it would be the first track, the Siberian Overture, just because that opening scene of the film is one of my favourites out of any MCU film. Just the sort of confusion you have as to what's going on, and then the realisation of this very dramatic scene that is obviously repeated throughout the film, and is almost the linchpin for the whole conflict between Stark and Rogers. I just love the emotional context that the theme has, and the way it sort of blends into the opening Marvel titles.
Yeah, that's a great reasoning for that. That's fab. Well, thanks for that. That's great. We're going to go on a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to be talking about the first Captain America film.
Oh, yeah.
And then we're going to be doing our second segment, the 64K Ultra Mega HD range.
Can't wait for that one.
That never gets old to say. I always love saying that. I feel impressive when I'm able to run it off. When I mess it up, it's horrifically embarrassing. See you in a minute. And welcome back to part 2 of our MCU part 2 review. That's a very long-winded title, but now we're going to be talking about Captain America, the First Avenger. Again, a film that I personally kind of like, but have flaws with. But I like it more than Thor, I will say that.
Definitely,
spoiler alert straight away there.
Definitely love it more than Thor. It is interesting that they both came out in the same year, very close to each other, and how much stronger I feel this is as a film.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I feel as though Thor is more consistent as a whole, as a film.
Definitely.
Whereas this definitely has shoots in way more different places, quite literally, and does hit more marks, but there are still aspects that could almost be developed more and do feel kind of missed out upon.
I think it's a weird one because this film, the first hour is incredible. Like I love basically. I don't want to say everything up until he gets the serum, but it's kind of like that a little bit. I think he, Chris Evans, does a great job with the CGI team as well. May I add, like, incredible how they made like that work for so long and so much of the film. But the character of Steve Rogers is so well done for that first hour, and he's done great in the second half as well. But I feel like there's a point in this film. I think it's got a great balance of things, but this film kind of like takes a turn halfway through for me. It goes from something, again, a bit more emotionally rich and sort of, I don't want to say deep, but it's very well crafted in the kind of person who Steve Rogers is, and his relationship with Peggy, and his relationship with Bucky, and the kind of world that it builds with Hydra and all that sort of stuff. But the second you get to the second half, and you got like the more far-fetched stuff, it starts to get a little bit, I don't know, iffy for me in terms of its story, in terms of its character, in terms of even like the CGI and stuff. It feels like two different films crammed together almost. The start of it's brilliant for me, but the last half is good, but it's not incredible, you know. But yeah, what do you have to say about that? What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, and also how you enjoyed the first half of it the most, because I feel like I may have almost been the opposite, where it took me a long time to sort of get past that CGI Chris Evans look with the smaller body, just because I think I'm so used to seeing him as he looks regularly now.
Yeah.
Going back to pre-Super Serum Steve Rogers, it was kind of in my face a bit. And kind of took me out of the film because I was trying to look out for how they were doing it and any imperfections in the sort of face. I actually really enjoy the moments with Steve, Peggy, and Howard Stark. And I kind of wish that this film lent more into their sort of relationship and their missions together.
Yeah.
Because it feels like we get a bit of it with the montage sequence in the sort of middle part of the film, and then the big mission at the end. But it's something that I wish there was more of.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think there's a development which could happen there that just sort of didn't. I feel this film was carrying a lot with it in terms of what it had to do for its story. It knew that it had to end up in the modern day, so it had to do all the stuff with Steve Rogers crashing into the ice and stuff, which is fine and it's all good, but it does build a lot. This is Steve Rogers' story, and the time for him to shine with the whole Hydra stuff was sort of depleted a little bit. However, you know, I really do like this film, again, especially much more than Thor. Like, Thor is good, and we did give it a lot of praise, but even the sort of...
I feel like we gave Thor the first Thor way too much praise, actually.
Yeah, a little bit. But now that I'm thinking about Captain America, I'm like, Christ, like, Thor's good, but it's also a bit shit. Like, it does its trick, but it's not that impressive. It's not that out there.
It's also very contained. Like you were saying, like what is quite charming about it is that it's in this little street in the desert, wherever it is. And then there's the Asgard stuff, and it's all sort of contained in those two locations. Whereas what is quite surprising going back to the First Avenger is all of the different locations it goes through, from I can't name them, but even
Yeah.
from the military grounds to like the forest to the Alps, the Hydra bases,
Like Brooklyn as well.
Brooklyn, it covers a lot of ground, quite literally, just in the locations, which I think helps keep the story on a quick, fast-moving pace, which was quite refreshing coming from Thor's perhaps slower pace.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's a totally different kind of film, and this feels a lot more in keeping with the MCU's general theme. This feels, again, especially stuff like Iron Man, which is also built around war, but in the modern day, including, of course, you've got characters like Howard Stark, Tony's dad, and able to use that and play around with that in Captain America was really interesting. And I loved that aspect of it. I think Hydra's kind of where it falls apart for me a little bit. I don't really particularly like the style and like aesthetic that they go for. I much prefer what Hydra is in Winter Soldier. You know, even though like I can go on about how I'm not too keen on overly campy kind of like Nazi archetypes. However, then if we ever talked about Winter Soldier, I'd tell you that my favourite part of that film is the mad Nazi AI computer thing, like the analog, which is for me the best part of the film. It's so like gorgeous aesthetically. So I'm sort of two minds about it. One hand, I really like this sort of stuff, and it feels a little bit like Indiana Jonesy in a like sort of endearing kind of way. But at the same time, it comes across a little bit cheesy, and I'm not too keen on the sci-fi Nazi element that it kind of tries to bring in with the Tesseract and like the weaponry they use with the Tesseract. Starts to get a bit lasery and a bit spacey, and I'm like,
no, I definitely agree with you. Like the way they played them off as this shadowy, behind the scenes organization in Winter Soldier definitely works a lot better in my opinion. And I feel as though, almost like we were talking about with Thor, it does have more of this melodramatic fantasy storytelling, which I feel like maybe it's just because we've got used to the way the MCU films are, but I feel like it's all integrated a lot more in the sort of real world to an extent. I'm sort of realizing what I'm saying. But like the whole bit where we see all those Hydra soldiers, and there's millions of them underground, and they're all saluting Red Skull.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't need to be that many soldiers. It could have been a smaller group, a more shadowy organization behind the scenes, but suddenly Red Skull's got all of these soldiers. But it feels like that scale, other than these establishing shots, that scale of threat is never really executed in any other parts of the film.
It weirdly, and this is a very strange comparison, so don't stay with me on this a little bit. Like the final part of the film and the aesthetic that Hydra sets up, as well as the story of them infiltrating the base and kind of like trying to get to the guy, it reminds me a bit of Star Wars.
Okay.
In a weird way, it's like it goes from like when there's like they put the explosive when Steve's getting the serum, and Steve chases the guy down the street, and it's very like of its time, very like Indiana Jonesy, kind of like of its era. And then you go from that sort of thing to like named people with faces working for Hydra to loads of masked figures with sci-fi guns, with this big leader who has his base and loads of sci-fi ideas, and they're all flying away on this sort of like ship airplane kind of thing. There's a few little elements there where I was like, it's weird, because it's what I'm saying about it being two different films almost. One, like, if this half of it feels like Star Wars based in like wartime Earth, and then the other half feels like an actual like kind of almost authentic World War II story.
It's interesting that you say that, George, because did you know?
Oh, is there a fun fact coming?
Fun fact. Did you know that Joe Johnston worked within the special effects VFX department of, I'm pretty sure, some Indiana Jones and Star Wars films?
Bloody hell.
I
did not know that.
Directing The Rocketeer.
I did not know that.
So, there you go.
Well, that suddenly makes a lot of sense. And it makes me sound very clever for not knowing that and coming out with that by myself, yeah.
I thought you were going to lead into it yourself.
Honestly, I had no idea. That's mad. That's brilliant, though. But I can kind of see it. I get that vibe. It's got that open kind of adventure kind of aesthetic to it. But at the same time, I feel like the way it crams the two styles together don't always gel for me. Yeah.
I even got almost some like James Bond vibes from it, because
A little bit,
obviously
yeah.
he's Captain America is almost like this agent and gets given these special gadgets. Especially there's the bit with the motorbike, and he's got these switches, and it lets out, you know, the cables and different, you know, exhaust fire.
That's a good point. Yeah,
It kind of reminded me
Yeah.
very much of the, you know, traditional James Bondy gadgets.
I can kind of see what you mean there.
So it's
like
it's almost like
combining
a
a lot
whole
of
mismatch of different.
Yeah.
Inspirations.
And individually, like, it works. If the whole film was a bit Indiana Jones style, cool. If the whole film was a bit James Bondy, a bit cool. If the whole film was just all out weird Star Warsy kind of sci-fi authoritarian kind, cool. But because you're trying to cram all them together, I think that's where the film kind of falls apart for me. I love the opening for what it is, but it doesn't gel with the ending. I love the ending for what it is, but it doesn't gel with the opening. And out of the two, I prefer the opening, so I'm kind of like, the film falls apart towards the last half. Even though it still works, and it's still, well, it's not consistent, that's the wrong word. It's the opposite of what it is. It's good in its what it does, and it's enjoyable, but it's not consistent at all with the first half. And it's difficult to kind of pick a side almost.
Yeah, it definitely feels like they were juggling a lot of things and trying to incorporate a lot of ideas. Like, even for example, Bucky falling off. To sort of set up that Winter Soldier plot arc. I almost wish that we had more with Bucky as well, and then maybe that would have, because I love the Winter Soldier film, but perhaps if there was even more of that character in this film, then that would have exaggerate that emotional connection as an audience member. It
almost feels like there's more of a connection between Cap and Bucky in the future films opposed to in this initial one, which is really where they had to establish it, because this is why they're friends, you know? And I get that a little bit with the opening, but then, like, once the story sort of turns to Steve Rogers getting the serum and all that sort of thing, I don't really get a feeling that it's the same sort of vibe there. I don't really get a feeling that he cares as much for him as he does later on. But maybe that's because, you know, maybe that's development. Maybe that's because he lost his mate, and then that's why now he doesn't want to lose him again, you know.
What are your thoughts on the montage section? Because that almost says like there was a lot that they wanted to do, and so then they had to skip over it in this montage. Do you think it
which
works?
montage section was this again?
So when Captain America goes through sort of chasing Hydra, and it has him shooting them down, blowing up tanks.
I thought it was good. I think it screamed budgetary issues to me. It was like, we want to do this, we can't, but we want to, and this all happened, definitely, but we can't show it.
Talking about budgetary issues, it is interesting how much the visual effects of Marvel have changed and obviously gotten way better over time. Obviously, this was 2011, so completely different time to now, like a decade ago. But there are certain scenes where you're like, crikey, that doesn't look good. Even at the end where Captain America is chasing, is the plane called Valkyrie, or am I getting confused?
I don't know.
The big plane at the end, and Captain America's chasing it. It's this one sort of wide mid shot of him running, and you're like, well, that's clearly him on like a treadmill running in front of a green screen.
Yeah. There's stuff like that in it which are always a bit weird, but like, and I don't think anything particularly stuck out for me in terms of bad CGI. I even like the way that like Red Skull looked. I thought that was quite impressive. Yeah, probably mostly prosthetics, but the way with the skin peeling off and stuff was kind of weird and interesting and new.
It's spooky when he throws that rubber mask down into the flames, and there's like this lingering wide shot of the mask burning up, and I'm sure you could analyze that like, oh, is his humanity burning up within, and now he's just this evil
something like
villain.
Something like that. Yeah, it's a weird one. What do you think of Red Skull as a villain for this?
What do I think? I agree with you what you were saying about Hydra and them being too much in your face with the war sort of vibe.
Yeah.
It does feel strange in that I feel like that obviously they were trying to balance the enemy, the general enemy of this war they're fighting being the Nazis, and then the hidden enemy being Hydra. And what do I think of Red Skull?
That's the big question.
know.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
He doesn't really have much of a character.
I think in your part 1 episode, you and your guest, who I apologise,
Philip Hawkins,
you were talking about how the villains of these first few films are almost mirror images, like flip Uno reverse cards of the protagonist, and I guess that Red Skull also fits that category of being the opposites of Steve Rogers and still having the super soldier, but also being all of the opposite traits. And it doesn't really feel like we get much out of him other than him being this evil Nazi person.
He's a very stereotypical kind of just like Nazi kind of character.
It would have been interesting. Yeah, okay, there we go. I have something to say on him. It hints on him being interested in like the sort of hidden magic and secret stuff with the whole Tesseract and everything. And they talk about him being interested in it and obsessed with it, but we never really see much of that. And it would have been cool to see some like weird experiments and lore going on. Obviously, like we get the bit towards the start of the film where he discovers the Tesseract, and so that's quite interesting, and there's the old man guarding it. But it would have been cool to have more stuff of that. I feel like he's not differentiated enough from a typical Nazi leader, if that makes sense. It doesn't feel like there's enough other than him being a Red Skull.
Yeah. I mean, it's a cool like design, but beyond that, I don't really know what else it offers.
Yeah.
I don't really know much about the character from the comics, to be honest. But like, it's one of those things where it's like I wish they'd just done a bit more with it. But most Marvel villains of this era kind of had that same sort of issue where they're just kind of there and don't really do anything. I mean, and that's the prime example with this one. I don't really feel anything either way towards this character because I don't feel like I've had enough time with him. I feel like Infinity War gave us more of an insight into the guy's character than, this does.
Yeah.
It's a bit odd, but, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
The music's brilliant. Obviously, Alan Silvestri doing the score for this one.
Yeah, lots of great themes.
Obviously, the iconic Captain America theme, and there's some great just general music in this that I think is really pretty good. Actually, I think if there's anything else I want to say about Captain America, really.
What did you think of the sort of characterization of Peggy Carter? Because I was actually surprised going back to this, almost how little she has to do. I know, like this. You can probably say a lot about her just being like the sort of emotional driving point for Steve Rogers. But yeah, like literally, it doesn't really feel like she does much more than that. And so it's cool that she had the whole Agent Carter series. But it would have been nice. Yeah, I've not actually watched it. But it would have been nice to have more elements of that in this, and that's why I think focusing more on Steve, Howard, and Peggy would have been good to help develop all of those characters.
Especially Howard as well, who's like a big part of Iron Man's story. That would have been great to really develop a relationship between him and Steve Rogers. I don't know. I quite like the way Peggy's done in this film. Obviously, I would like to have more. But I think, again, it's one of those things where, it is what it is. We got what we got. There was so much that they had to do in this film. But that's kind of where I start to dislike stuff with the MCU, is that, like, even this early on, I'm like, Iron Man just being able to do its own thing and not worrying about what it has to set up and where it has to go. It's like, obviously, Captain America kind of has to end in the modern day. Like, it kind of has to do that because that's the story of Captain America. But it's almost like, I wish they'd just taken a bit more time so that they didn't have to set up stuff like the Tesseract.
Yeah.
Like the Tesseract didn't have to be in this film at all.
Well, one
but
comparison...
they did because it's like part of it, but...
Yeah, it does feel like... I feel the same with Thor, that the relationships with the love interests, obviously with Thor and Jane Foster, and in this one with Captain America and Peggy Carter, they all feel quite rushed. And it's
definitely.
They're like acquaintance, they're friends, they're sort of getting to know each other, and then suddenly they're almost kissing, or suddenly Peggy Carter is getting jealous because Steve's kissing someone else, and I'm like, hang on, did I miss
There's like a
relationship build up.
bit
It
of
feels like it
context
suddenly
that's
jumps.
kind of missing
Yeah.
there. Yeah, I know what you mean. That's an interesting one. I think it'll be interesting to see what they do with the future of the MCU. Have you seen What If?
I have seen the first episode, so that was obviously interesting watching this because that's
Yeah.
the whole Peggy Carter.
Well, there's talk about them incorporating What If into live action for Doctor Strange 2. Not sure how true some of these things are, but there's the idea been suggested that Peggy Carter could return as Captain Carter in
That
live
would be
action,
very cool.
alongside maybe Anthony Mackie's Captain America, which would be very interesting dynamic. But yeah, I mean, what would you think of that? If they sort of used that as an opportunity to really develop this version of Peggy Carter, opposed to the one we had in this universe?
No, definitely. I think that would be great. I can't remember the actor's name, but I think they're brilliant. And
Is it Haley Atwell?
Haley Atwell, that's right, yeah. And I think any more sort of screen time that they have to develop the character would be good. So yeah, no, that would definitely be really interesting to see.
Definitely.
And how they sort of reflect elements that we already know from the Steve Rogers Captain America and put a twist on them.
Because that is a Peggy Carter as well, as you'll sort of see towards the end of the series, because that character does come back in some way, shape or form. But by the point where you leave her in What If, this is Captain Carter at the point of where Steve Rogers was in Captain America 2, Winter Soldier. So there's a little bit of an element of that, which is quite interesting. So yeah, I'm not sure. That'll be interesting to see what they do with that.
Definitely.
Is there anything else you want to say about Captain America before we move on to our second segment?
No. I think we covered it all.
Brilliant stuff. So, in which case, we're going to move on to our second segment, which is the 64K Ultra Mega HD range.
Oh,
We ask guests on this show to bring in, again, a film this time that they want to highlight. We do the same speech every time, but I'm going to just do it because it's a laugh. We get rid of Steelbooks, Criterion Collection, your 4Ks, your Blu-rays, your DVDs, your videotapes, all that sort of kit and caboodle. This is the most exclusive range of DVD-related releases you'll ever have. And you get the lucky privilege of nominating one film that means something to you, or it's a film you just like, to this little collection. First of all, do you have any honourable mentions?
Honourable mentions? I think we'll just go straight to it.
Okay, in which case, what do you pick for your pick?
I'm going to pick
this
Thunderbirds 2004, directed by Jonathan Frakes.
That's an interesting shot. I haven't seen it.
You've not seen it?
I've not seen
Thunderbirds. Okay, so my love for this film...
Sell me in the audience.
My love for this film, I think it's probably my first ever cinema memory. Going to the cinema in the summer on the Isle of Wight, seeing this film when I was 4, and I'll probably credit it as developing my love for cinema. There's heroics, there's action, there's big flyy things, and there's people that need to be rescued, all tied up with a lovely bow with Hans Zimmer's beautiful score, which still holds up to this day. It's just a brilliant film. And the fact that it's only in the last few years that I realised that the director was Riker from Star Trek just adds even more value to it.
That's amazing. What like, do you have like a sort of personal connection with this film other than being one that you sort of loved when you were younger and has
I guess growing up I loved Thunderbirds, and I think seeing it in a live action form was just very magical at that young age. It is quite an interesting film because I feel like a lot of classic Thunderbird fans dislike it, and at the time it was sort of titled as being this Spy Kids knockoff and not really getting picked up well. But honestly, I rewatched it over lockdown with my friends and I still love it. It's still very magical for me. And I think the visual effects for it are really, like, they hold up really well for 2004 film. Like, they obviously had money for it. And so I think that, and definitely the music, and seeing it at a young age in a cinema, it's just ingrained in me.
Yeah.
So it has to make your collection.
That's brilliant. That's a great pitch. It's a great pitch. I now want to watch it. You sold me on it. I'm very curious. I think when you said it for Thunderbirds initially, I was like, interesting. And then when you said it was live action, I'm like, I can't even imagine that. Yeah. I didn't even know this was a thing.
Yeah, well, it's definitely one.
So I feel like Thunderbirds was the one with the puppets.
Yeah, I feel like if you're watching it without any sort of childhood nostalgia, it's probably one of those films that is a good laugh, with a few pints with some mates.
Yeah.
And you sort of, pin pick it a bit.
Yeah.
But no, it is a fun watch. It is a fun watch. It's got a smashing cast as well. Bill Paxton, I hope is his name, and a lot of other great people. The Lady Penelope, I hope I'm not getting any of these facts wrong, but the Lady Penelope's the one. Yeah, Sophia Myles, who was obviously Girl in the Fireplace in Doctor Who.
God, yeah, bloody hell. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's got a great cast. Love it.
Brilliant stuff. Well, that's a great note to end on before we go on to another break. When we get back, we're going to be talking about the Avengers film, the culmination of all of these films. Brilliant. We're going to be talking about that, and then we're going to be... Amazing, that's brilliant. We're going to be talking about that film, and then we're going to be doing some hot takes and fun facts from you guys on Twitter. So that'll be fun, hopefully. And yeah, so see you in a minute.
See you in a bit.
Okay, and welcome to part 3. Now we're going to be talking about Avengers Assemble, or The Avengers, or wherever you are in the world. It has a different title, I think. It's a bit like the first Harry Potter film. A bit weird, that one.
Philosopher's Stone? Sorcerer's Stone?
It's a weird one. It's a weird one. Avengers. This is the first ever Marvel film I watched.
This is the first Marvel film I watched in the cinema.
Amazing. I can't remember the first one I watched in the cinema. I think I saw this at home on like a home release a few years later. Really liked it though.
Loved it.
Although there's a part of me which I'm going to have to be critical about this.
Oh.
Because I don't think it's as amazing as people think it is. Like, it was really good at the time, but it's of its time. You know what I mean?
Definitely. I think at the time we were all just amazed that all of these characters had been mashed together. Like we were saying, the fact that Thor, Captain America, Iron Man, all these people from different contexts and different times were suddenly in the same film fighting alongside each other. It was like, hold up, what's going on here?
Yeah, I think that's the big sort of selling point of it, especially at the time. I think looking back now after Infinity War and Endgame, it's like, this is just a few people, it's just like a mini Avengers. But it's cool. What it does is it brings together the Phase 1 like really bloody well. And of course the post-credit scene sets up the future with Thanos and stuff. The story itself is pretty good. I'm not a huge fan of like the brainwashing stuff with Loki, but I love Loki's inclusion in this. I think he's so much better than he was in Thor. He's got so much more presence, I feel.
Definitely.
And he feels like a much bigger villain than he did in Thor. And I really liked that. I thought it was really interesting how they were able to incorporate all the different characters and universes and styles. And even watching it now, there's a lot of excitement for it. Even that opening scene where the SHIELD headquarters is kind of... Does he get destroyed? I'm trying to think, does he like sort of fall into the ground or something? Or am I just imagining that?
Something like that. There's something to do with like the big black 4x4s driving into the base and then them driving out or escaping on a helicopter. There's
something like that. But it's a fantastic opening. When it cuts to that title card, it's like, oh my god, wow. And then we get straight into a first scene with like Black Widow and Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk, or Bruce Banner at that point.
So we got a new Hulk in this film.
Which is interesting. I think Mark Ruffalo's brilliant.
Mark Ruffalo is fantastic.
I didn't hate Edward Norton when I rewatched The Incredible Hulk, but Mark Ruffalo just embodies the character so well. Both the Hulk and Bruce Banner, especially Bruce Banner. I really get the sense that this is just some nerdy kid who's a fantastic scientist and just had this one thing sort of go wrong.
Yeah,
I love
the setup that Mark Ruffalo's Hulk has, where he's almost sort of treated like this, clean addict. And obviously Black Widow comes along and is like, no, we need you to do the drug again. And
Yeah,
he's
literally.
like, no, I've gone clean.
That's kind of the connotation. I think that's an interesting idea there. Because it is a bit like that. And I love the way it treats Bruce Banner in this. Because obviously it's supposed to be the same guy from the other film. The continuity isn't perfect, but I love the fact that he's in a totally different place here. This is a Bruce Banner who's been the Hulk for a long time, and he's just like, he's done with it. He's at the bottom, like, and he even says about a point where he tried to kill himself, and the Hulk just spat the bullet right back out.
It's quite dark.
Really dark for like this stage of like the Avengers films and stuff. Like
This family fun film.
yeah, and he talks about that. It was interesting, but I think the way Bruce Banner was done in this was very, very good. And I think Mark Ruffalo's entirely to thank for that.
We get the iconic Hulk smash moment with Loki.
Of course, we love that. There's loads of great moments. But the Hulk has done really well in this. I think, especially just on the topic of the Hulk, the scene in the air base thing when everything sort of kicks off, and Black Widow's sort of in the underdecks, and like Mark Ruffalo sort of turns into the Hulk. There's a great, so I don't know what it is about that, but the CGI there looks really, really good. There's that shot where he's sort of smashing through these glass cabinets as he like runs down a hallway, like running after Black Widow, and it looks genuinely brilliant. Like the way that was lit, and also the CGI there, the way they managed to incorporate that and make it feel real was so good.
Yeah.
And also the Hulk's like that throughout a lot of this, but especially when you compare it to the Incredible Hulk's CGI.
Well, I don't know.
It's a huge step up.
Well, yeah, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty sure that they used Mark Ruffalo, like they used motion capture for his performance of the Hulk for this one, whereas I'm not too sure if they did that or if the technology was even around for 2008's Incredible Hulk. So obviously there was a whole new implementation of the actor's performance, which they could characterize within the CGI.
Yeah, I think they do motion
Which
capture,
definitely shows.
even from this one, and you can kind of tell a little bit as well. The model for Hulk, like the actual look of the guy, looks different and it looks more refined. It looks like Mark Ruffalo. It actually you believe it. I don't know. It works really well, and like the way they do that character, the payoffs they have with him is fantastic in my opinion. We obviously get a lot more with Hawkeye and Black Widow in this as well.
Finally, Hawkeye gets more screen time.
Than just
So
sort of
this
aiming.
is the first proper like feature he's in, other than that little crane sequence in Thor, right?
Yeah, literally.
That's
insane.
pretty funny.
But like I like him in this.
Yeah, he really, the scenes that he's in, obviously like Hawkeye gets a lot of flack for not really doing a lot, but
Being played by Jeremy Renner. So
I think the scenes that he's in are great, and obviously there's that whole bit of him never missing a shot, and he's shooting down Chitauri fighters like it's any day. Like the scenes that he's in, he's really strong, and so I am looking forward to the new Hawkeye series and actually getting, for once, him as the main focus. Because I don't feel like we've actually
I'm
had
looking
that.
forward to how they handle that. Because I think Hawkeye got a lot more development in the second Avengers film.
Definitely.
But in this, the problem I have with him in this is that he's brainwashed for half of it. So you don't really feel like I get to sort of get a good sense of the character until the final act and the final battle. But then by that point, it's too late because I've got to know all the other characters so well. I'm only really caring about them. He's just sort of support. He's got less character than some of the Shield agents. So it's a bit annoying because you want him to be, I don't know, like impactful. You want him to have a good character, especially when he's one of the Avengers.
Yeah.
But I never really felt like Hawkeye was one of like the Avengers, only because of his lack of development across these films.
No, it is a shame, and it would have been interesting whether from the get-go in this film, or even if he was integrated more so in earlier films, his relationship with Black Widow, because I feel like that's always sort of hinted at with a few lines, but it's never really explored deeply, and that could have been much more of a connecting sort of transition to introduce the character. Obviously, we now know who Black Widow is from Iron Man 2.
Yeah.
And then to feature her friend and fighting partner Hawkeye in the Avengers and showing more of their friendship would have been really good. But like you say, maybe that whole brainwashing element sort of detracted from that.
I can't help but look back and feel that maybe like it would have been interesting to see them flip the Hawkeye and Black Widow introductions. So Hawkeye was like a main character in Iron Man 2, which would make more sense with the whole like Whiplash thing with all the robots. You know, he could just shoot them. And then with Thor, you could have someone who couldn't just shoot Thor, but you could actually have them fight. So you could have him and Black Widow actually fight. I feel like if they'd done it that way around, despite the fact that Iron Man 2's story wouldn't really work, because the whole, like...
That would have definitely made more use of their abilities, though.
Definitely, yeah. And I saw sometimes think that, and I'm like, I wonder why they didn't at least try and have a think about that. Because, yeah, I feel like they could. I feel like they very easily could have done something like that. Because then again, like, we know Black Widow quite a lot because of her inclusion in Iron Man 2, but you couldn't do much with Hawkeye because the whole thing is that he never misses, but he never gets the chance to shoot because it's almost a bit too gruesome in a way. Unless it's some sort of CGI robot or alien, it's too gruesome to show. But yeah, no, I'm not really sure. The main characters other than that, obviously we've got Steve Rogers and Tony Stark in this.
Steve Rogers, who is now in the present day. I do think, I'll probably put it out there now, I do think Captain America is my favourite MCU character, just because, as I sort of hinted at before, Winter Soldier, Civil War, my two favourite films overall. And also, I feel like throughout all of the films, he always seems to get given the most sort of conflict and interesting story arcs going on. Obviously, like in the Avengers, we have this character out of the Second World War, suddenly in the present day, suddenly being enlisted into this mad superhero squad, and then all of these sort of feelings that he has to go through, but at the end of the day, he's there to do his thing and fight for his country. And obviously all of those emotional thoughts of being, you know, asleep in an ice cube have to be pushed back so he can do that. And I'm very happy that we explore more of that emotional weight in Winter Soldier. But yeah, I find him a really interesting character in this.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's what I will say is I hate his costume.
Yeah.
The costume in this is ass.
Especially, I love the badass one from Winter Soldier. Especially whenever you go back to this one, it's always a bit like, oh, okay, yeah. Like
it's almost like spandex or something, isn't it? It's like it's like a onesie he's wearing. I totally agree with what you're saying there about Steve Rogers. I think he's a great character in this, and I really love the conflict between him and Tony Stark. I never liked that when I was younger, but I really appreciate it now and the kind of people that they are, especially with the context of where it goes in the future. You know, with about like with Steve saying that Tony's never the kind of man to, you know, to lay his life down for what he believes in, and obviously that's exactly what he does in Endgame.
They agree.
They certainly do. But yeah, no, I think it's an interesting one. The characters in this are really well done. I love, again, Tony Stark's done brilliantly. Again, mostly due to Robert Downey Jr.'s performance. He's brilliant in this role. He's born to play it, and he does a fantastic job in this.
I definitely see this film as almost like an Iron Man film. Obviously, like with Iron Man being the groundworks for the whole MCU, I feel like that's only sort of natural, and that he does sort of play into being the linchpin in the Avengers films. But yeah, because obviously like we have Stark Tower become the Avengers Tower, and him setting up. Yeah. Doesn't it open up with him setting up the energy source for the tower or
like,
the city?
Like he's the man with the money, you know. He's the man who like runs these things and runs these operations. And it works really well, and I love the way, again, they do his character in this. I love the confrontations, but also that it makes sense.
What's going on outside?
Absolute racket outside. It's not that someone's been shot. I thought we were in bloody Finchley Road, not bloody Harrow again. I probably can't keep that in.
You just doxed yourself on the podcast.
Yeah, no, I think... I love the way they do the characters in this. I think it's such an achievement of how they managed to get all these characters with very different, conflicting interests and ideas and personalities and bring them all together and it work in the same continuity. This, at the time, people probably watched this and were like, they can't do any better than this. They've topped it. And then, you know, years to come, they have like Endgame and stuff, which is why when people say like Endgame was brilliant, but they can't top that now, I'm like, You know what? I think they might try though.
Definitely.
I think they're gonna like put
Especially
it
with
up
this
there.
whole multiverse.
The multiverse stuff
swirling
excites
up.
me. Excites me, man.
Definitely.
The amount of stuff that Marvel owns is exciting. But like we'll wait and see. I think this is of its time such an achievement. And if you look back and you think about the context of what it was like at the time, it's so impressive. So impressive that they managed to pull this off as well as they did.
I love the way it looks as well. It does.
Yeah.
It does have that. I feel like Thor, Captain America, in this. There's a lot of moments where you do get like a proto MCU sense to it, like you were saying, almost like the Sam Raimi Spider-Mans, where it does. It still sort of holds on to that self-contained film look, and you can sort of tell that there's more practical on-location shooting, whereas now. Obviously, it still looks good, but I feel like they rely more on sort of the CGI created worlds on the soundstage to execute their location filming. Whereas this, you can tell. Oh yeah, that's obviously a shot in New York, which they've edited in extras and everything, and it still has this big scale sort of filmic look to it. And I'm not too sure if it was. Again, I don't know if this is a fact or if it was one of the last films in the Marvel universe which was still shot on film before they went over to digital.
I didn't even know they shot any on film.
I can't put my hand down on that, but there is definitely a sort of look to it which I feel is lost in the more recent films.
Definitely. I get that a lot, but that does tend to happen when you try and pump out 4 films a year. It's very like formulaic, and I think what I love about this is that this was like the event of 2012. This was the Marvel film.
This was the event. No, I was watching the trailer for it before the podcast, and the dramaticness and the music, it's very... This is the 2012 big film blockbuster that you need to see. Whereas now I feel like everyone already knows what the MCU is, so they just lean into the nostalgia and the music, like, you know, the Infinity War trailers or whatever, and they just use the Avengers music and look at all these characters who we know and love. Whereas for the trailer for the Avengers 2012, it's very much like slow motion people running away from fires in New York City, and you're like, what's going on? Like, weird chaos happening. And then, like, Nick Fury's like, you know, the idea, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, whoa, what? These heroes are coming together? Like, it's very, like you said, action-packed blockbuster. You need to see this film.
And I quite like that. I get that vibe from this. This is sort of... Phase 1's so separate from the rest of the universe. The second you move into Phase 2 with Iron Man 3, it feels different straight away. There's a different vibe to it. There's a different budget to it. There's a different team behind it. And that's when it starts to get more formulaic. I don't mind it, but it does shift. And I think Avengers and Phase 1, and obviously these sort of review episodes so far we've done on this podcast, we've done all the Phase 1 films now. So to really summarise that up, I think it is a brilliant achievement. And I love the fact that it's packaged so well. It's like, if the rest of the MCU didn't happen, that would still be praised as like a nice little collection of films, like a little film franchise that worked really well and didn't go anywhere, but just worked for what it was.
Well, by the Avengers, how many films had they already done? They'd already done Iron Man 1, 2. I'm going to have to count it. Like Thor,
5.
Captain America. So they'd already had a big, you know, that's already like a big achievement to have a film continuity shared universe go that far.
By the time Avengers came out, they had as many films at that time as Star Wars had.
There you go. And that was within the course of, what, 5 years?
Yeah.
Less than that?
So impressive. And it's, mad respect to them for pulling it off, and Avengers is a great way to end it on. I think in comparison, Avengers isn't my all-time favourite. The vibe of it, because it's dated, I think, now, and because it's not as coherent with the future style, it almost has a weird sort of... in a sort of weird way, this sounds a bit odd, but it kind of terms you'll understand, like a Doctor Who sense, where it's like, when there's such a big continuity, for me it's easier for it all just to be the same and feel the same.
Yeah.
When it starts to feel, like this feels so separate that it's like...
It's very different now.
Yeah.
No, I totally get that. Well, yeah. No, it is interesting though how it also, like you said, it was, you know, a big moment film, but it also opened up the doors for the future films, and introduced us to even more space as a threat, and obviously that does a lot to Tony Stark's character.
It's the first
The
time they
way
venture out into space, isn't it?
yeah, the way it sets up this future style and themes of alien invasions is very interesting.
Definitely. And I think it's a fascinating film that really. I think it's almost shocked at itself that it managed to pull it off in a weird way. Is that there's so much there with like the Chitauri army and even bringing Thanos into it that early on. Such a ballsy move, but it paid off. It worked, got people excited, and it ended up, building towards one of the biggest like cinematic events in history, which is insane to think. But yeah, no, I think this film has a lot of achievements, and it has to be respected for that a little bit. I think it's solid.
I find it really interesting as well. When I was watching these films as they were coming out, I always felt as though Shield was sort of there, and very quickly it wasn't. With the whole Hydra scenario in Winter Soldier and Shield sort of being disbanded. It's quite interesting going back to this film where Shield is very much the center of the film, and Nick Fury is obviously there, and it's it's out there. It's not obviously Nick Fury and the Shield elements, and now Sword. It almost feels it went a bit more like underground, especially in Age of Ultron. Nick Fury just shows up in that barn, right? Whereas in this, it's very much like, we've got all these big logos, here's S.H.I.E.L.D., we've got these big heli carriers, we're here to bring the Avengers together. And I always thought that went away very quickly. What do you think of that? Do you feel like S.H.I.E.L.D. should have stuck around a bit longer before they hid them away?
I'm not a huge S.H.I.E.L.D. fan. I think that's one thing. I never really watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but it was always that kind of aesthetic that I wasn't too keen on with the MCU. The kind that I kind of like is the more flashy, out there kind of stuff. I love the Spider-Man films, but like Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy. When it really takes risks, the MCU, and like Infinity War and Endgame, it's like I love those for what they are. There's the superheroes. It's like there comes a point where it's like they are just heroes, and I feel like with this, it's like they're just kind of employed by S.H.I.E.L.D., which I don't mind, but I'm kind of happy that they kind of disbanded when they did. And even though they still exist to some capacity in the MCU now, it's not the same vibe or aesthetic that it used to be. Because even I think at the time when I'm looking at this, I like it, but I look back in even for 2012, this feels a bit dated.
Yeah.
You look back at like stuff at the time, is like 2012 was also the year that The Dark Knight Rises came out.
Yeah.
Like this style and aesthetic is obviously very different, but with S.H.I.E.L.D. it's like this sort of big US military government kind of thing. It's like, yeah, it's cool, but I feel like I've seen so much of that in the 90s that I'm kind of happy at that point in Winter Soldier when it kind of got disbanded a little bit.
Well, it's interesting you bring up obviously Dark Knight Rises as well, and I think, as mentioned before, you did talk about this in part one of your MCU podcast, but obviously the way in which the sort of style at the time for the superhero films was to try and ground them as much as possible in a real world. And it would be interesting to think about, like, is S.H.I.E.L.D. incorporated within the Avengers as like a big player to sort of help ground these heroes in the real world with the sort of governmentalness to it? I know obviously it's adapted from the comic books where they're a big presence, but
I think you're right.
What would it have been like without S.H.I.E.L.D.? Would that have been more difficult to sort of bring these characters down to earth? You
kind of had to have that, and it definitely would have struggled to do that. But I think for me, especially with the MCU, like where I start to really love it is where it starts to get a bit more spacey and a bit weird and all that sort of thing. Which is why, like the multiverse stuff, I'm all over it. I love that stuff. Do anything, and I think it's. I want to be critical about it, but honestly, you throw in Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, I'm there. I'm there on opening night. I don't care. I'm watching it. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that. It does entice me a lot more. And Kang the Conqueror already very interesting stuff. Like, but we go back to here. It's like I like it. I like the film. But the one thing that really drags on me is this sort of S.H.I.E.L.D., that realistic, gritty element, which just doesn't work for me.
Feels like they're holding back on the comic book elements, which it now feels more free to express.
Especially like the early era of the MCU really held back on the comic book accurate costumes as well. Obviously now like Scarlet Witch has only just got her like proper
that's
costume,
kind of mad, isn't it? Yeah.
Considering she's been in since Phase 2. And there's the same with a few of them. There's the same like with a few characters. It took a while to really get them to like a proper comic booky feeling like outfit. Like, obviously, Iron Man was there like straight away.
Will we ever see Hawkeye's purple look?
Exactly like that. I'm trying to think what else there is, but there's other scenarios, and even like, but with the newer MCU, they feel a lot more brave to just jump in with more comic book accurate costumes, despite how that might look. So, for example, like Falcon and Winter Soldier, like having the Falcon Captain America, that's quite an out there look. It's quite bright and vibrant, and it works. But they wouldn't have taken that risk in 2012 with the original Avengers, you know what I mean? Yet they did take the risk on some sort of onesie look. It's quite strange.
Back to the onesie look.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say about Avengers before we move on to some hot takes?
Well,
and,
two interesting things.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was interesting, but maybe just to highlight, obviously, how much of like a momentous film this was. I remember going to a new secondary school. It must have been obviously like I was going into year 8. This was like 2012, 2013. There was this one English teacher who was always playing this film to his students.
Oh my God.
I was walking past his classroom like every day when he'd have like the different classes in, and he was always showing them the Avengers. And yeah, if that teacher felt like it was good enough to show to every class, then it must have been a big film. Also, the cinematographer, Seamus McGarvey, is a alumni from our university. I don't know if that's public knowledge what he goes to. But yeah, Seamus McGarvey went to our uni, which is pretty cool. And he's also back for Spider-Man
No Way Home.
No Way Home.
Interesting.
So there you go.
That is interesting. I quite like that. That's a little really interesting fun facts. And on the topic of fun facts, we've got some people to try and give us some fun facts and hot takes. I don't know what's going to be here. I haven't read these. They could be total rubbish. But it's a mix between hot takes and fun facts. We get to react to people's hot takes and also if we know their fun facts. So, Elliot Jacob Stockdale says, they're all bland. Difficult for me to rewatch. Some good moments in Avengers, but the other two I don't particularly enjoy that much at all. And that's fair enough.
Yeah, I feel like we definitely focus more on the redeeming elements of these films, but I feel like we were sort of getting at that they do feel sort of disconnected from the later films, and definitely overall looking back at them, they were of their time.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a fair point. I think I can understand, because it's such a different vibe and aesthetic, and I think that will be a lot of the cases with these hot takes, is that because they're so different, they are a bit like, well, I'll just not watch those ones. You know what I mean?
But you've still got to admire what they did.
I do. I think
we wouldn't be where we are now.
And I think they're brilliant for what they do. We've got another comment here from Kit who says, the Avengers isn't worth watching anymore. It was special at the time, but with each phase of the MCU building on the last and growing, phase 1 has become lackluster by comparison. Though unlike the other films, the Avengers doesn't have the benefit of being an origin story.
That's true. That's true.
So it's kind of it's a very fair point actually, because it can't rely on being an origin, but at the same time, but I would argue, in a weird way, and a bit of a bounce back to that, I would argue it is an origin story of the Avengers.
There you go.
It's an origin story for that like group. If you're going to credit the origin story for Iron Man, or if you're going to discredit one from Phase 1, it would be Iron Man 2, because that's not an origin story, and that is dog shit. But the rest of them are origins, and this is a sort of it is a milestone. It is good, but I can understand why you'd say you probably wouldn't want to watch it anymore. As horrible as that feels, because it is a good film.
Yeah, I don't feel like you should dismiss it as a film, because with it does set up a lot of groundwork for the future films, especially like you mentioned, the sort of relationship between Stark and Captain America, and even someone like Hawkeye, who perhaps doesn't get enough screen time. It still gives more to that character, which we are now only just going back to exploring more in depth with their own solo shows. So there's a lot of elements that are still sort of hinted back to and mentioned in the new films today. Yeah,
we're getting a lot of similar sort of things. JH says,
is everyone hating on these?
Avengers is not the best Marvel movie and never was. It's just exciting to see all the characters together. The story is very convenient and quite nonsensical, and visually is nothing special. I do love it, but it's not the cinematic masterpiece many claim it to be. I'd probably agree with that, to be honest. I don't think it's like a masterpiece. I think it's a solid film, and it was an achievement for the time. But especially now with Endgame and Infinity War, looking back on it, it's like, it's hard to go, this is a cinematic masterpiece.
Well, yeah, no, I agree with that. I don't agree with the never was, though, because obviously at the time it was.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, no, fair dues.
Silver says, love them all, as true to the feel of the comics as you could get, in my opinion, and gave a huge boost to some of the actors' careers back then. That's very true, actually. Iron Man for Robert Downey Jr., especially Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston being picked up for Thor. And I don't really know too much about Chris Evans' career at the time, but it probably was a step up from the Fantastic Four films, so that's pretty good. Alternate 13th says, Avengers is actually a very underrated film. People remember the ending and the big battle, but never the other moments, like when Thor first meets Tony and Cap. Brilliant. Doth mother know you weareth her drapes? Is the quote they've used there to highlight how much they love that scene. And I think I would totally agree. There's some great jokes, and it mostly comes from Tony Stark, I'd say.
Yeah. And obviously, there's that natural comedy with Thor being that, classical Asgardian character.
Yeah.
Sort of doesn't quite fit, and we sort of laugh at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Jacob says, I could happily never watch Thor or First Avenger ever again.
Fair enough.
Spooky Lukey says, I prefer them all to their sequels.
Ooh, that is a hot take.
That is a hot take for Captain America. I don't know if it's a hot take for Avengers or Thor, because both of their sequels are a bit,
Well, with Thor, I don't know. I feel like Ragnarok, some people love it, some people hate it. So I guess fair enough. With Captain America, like I said, I've already said 2 and 3 are some of my favourite MCU films all time. So that does hurt me a little bit inside.
Yeah.
Avengers films, fair enough. I guess like we were talking about as well, the later films do get bigger, much bigger scale. So I guess if you do prefer that more homed in scale, then the original Avengers is a nice balance between the ensemble but still being focused.
Yeah, oh, definitely. We've actually got a fun fact here, which I did know about this, but I'd be interested to see if you knew this. You probably did. Aidan Gray talking about how Tom Hiddleston originally auditioned for Thor.
Oh, yeah.
But they thought he suited Loki better, and what a brilliant decision that was.
There's that lovely test footage of him with the wig, with like a fan blowing at him.
It's so weird. I've seen it online, but I'm glad they made the right decision, I think. There.
I'm really happy that, again, Loki's had more, and Tom Hiddleston has had more room to play with that character and develop it with the solo series.
And even like beyond that, like with Ragnarok and stuff, I feel like he's had a lot of say in the character and how that's gone about. Was he an executive producer on the Loki show? I'm not sure.
It wouldn't surprise me.
I feel like he might have been, or something like that, where he has like some sort of high up involvement in the behind the scenes of it. Captain America: The First Avenger is the follow-up for the Rocketeer that I've always wanted to see.
Yeah, Rocketeer love.
Thor, Andreas says, Thor 1 is the most well-written Thor has ever been as a character.
Oh, interesting.
What do you think about that? Because I don't know if I'd say he's well-written. I'd say he's probably written quite well as like a godlike figure. As in later films, he is more just like a superhero.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel like... I don't know, I guess, like I was saying, I feel like Ragnarok with the fans is quite hit and miss for some people. I personally really like that characterization of Thor, and so I would have to say that I do like Taika Waititi's version, because although there are a lot of comedy quips in it, which, isn't for everyone, there's still that whole, deeper characterization of him sort of tuning into his power and not relying onto the, physical element of the hammer and actually, believing in himself to channel the power, which I really liked. But yeah, I guess for that original screen portrayal, this is probably the most well-written. And then it obviously changes a lot as the films go on. It depends on
what you mean by well-written, though. By well-written, do you mean more of a thing where it's like the character's actually written well, or it's closer to how like they should be? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, I think I prefer the characterization of the Thor later on.
Okay.
Is a more comedy character.
Yeah.
However, I can understand why people would prefer the.
I guess
godlike
for the
kind of
serious portrayal,
Yeah.
consistently serious portrayal, then yeah, perhaps the first Thor
feeling. Yeah.
does that better.
And finally, we got from Sam Marshall in Thor, Chris Hemsworth had to dye his eyebrows blonde, which obviously was a mistake, and followed by Jamie Slough, who said, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall during the Hemsworth eyebrow discussion that the producers had. I can totally agree with that. And I think it's a lovely note and mental image to end on. That's basically the whole thing. We've been going for quite a while. Before we wrap up, is there anything you want to promote? Like social media pages or anything?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Woo! So you can follow my film work and photography on my Instagram, which is Ben_Vacher. Wait, I actually need to check my own Instagram handle. You can tell that I've not plugged this.
Yeah.
It is Ben_Vacher. So
There we go.
Ben_Vacher, and that is Vacher.
Just how it's spelled in the title of this podcast.
And I upload onto YouTube like once a year, but yeah, it'll be on the Instagram. But stories from the mouth, if you're interested in that. Maybe more film videos in the future. Who knows?
There we go. Nice little hint of things to come. And I messed that up. And as always, you can follow us on Twitter at SpillYourBeansPod, which is also linked on the page as per usual, and my own Twitter and Instagram handles at GBSheard. We'll see you all next week. I'm not really sure what the episode is. I think it might be The Lost Daughter, but I'm not 100% sure. So check back in a week, check the Twitter, whatever, and yeah, we'll be promoting that very soon. So
Thanks for having me, everyone.
yeah, thanks for being on, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.